This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about what is pod, what is service. We were discussing about service of types. So far, what type of services we discussed? We discussed about cluster IP service, and also we discussed about node port service. Now, pod is different, service is different. Pod basically, pod represents running process in Kubernetes. Pod will have one or more containers. Right? Pod is a wrapper of one or more containers. Pod is a wrapper of one or more containers. Right? So pod always runs on node. What do you mean by node? That node can be master also. That node can be a master or worker. Now, if I have a multiple containers in that pod, does all those containers will be co-located on the same node in which node that pod is scheduled? Does all the containers of that pod will be running in that same node? Yes. So as I already discussed, how one container can communicate with another container if they are in a same pod. Let's say there are two containers, just to give an example. How they can communicate with each other using local host and port. Using local host and port. Just to make it simple, let me create one multi-container pod. Let me create one multi-container pod just to demonstrate the connection. Okay. Now, API version v1 kind pod metadata name. This name can be anything. I'm just giving name as a test pod. Okay. Spec labels is required. Labels is required. Labels are required. Like this can be anything. Something like this. App test, whatever you want to give. Let's say you want to give something like this. Now here, containers. Name of the container. I can say some container. I am using some image. Can I give any name for container? Yes. Image, let me use this image. Whatever image I have. Otherwise, will I get that image pullback of error if I don't give proper image details? Yes. Let's say this one. Within this, I have what tag, whether I have a tag with 1, 2, 3 or latest. I have like tag as well. Let's say Java Web App 1 ports container port. Now, if required, can I have a one more container like this? Just I'm testing purpose, I am using this one. I'm just for testing purpose, I'm using this one. Something like this. I'm not mentioning the tag and registry. From which registry, what tag it will pull? This one. This is my image. It will pull from the public Docker hub with the tag as :latest. As I already told, can I have a multiple containers? If let's say this image is also running on 8080, let's say this image is also running on 8080, does it allow? Can we have a multiple containers in a same pod if the container port is same? No. But this is different software. Nginx. On which port it will run? That Nginx software 80. In this image, we have a Tomcat software. On which port that container will run? This one, Tomcat software 8080. Now, if I create a pod, this will have how many containers in that pod, guys? Now, in which namespace it is going to deploy? Since I have not mentioned any namespace, in which namespace it got deployed? Default. Now I can see 2. What do you mean by 2 here? This is pod. What do you mean by 2 here? Here 0 by 2 it is showing. So number of containers expected in that pod. Now it is showing 2 by 2, which means does both containers are ready in that pod? Now let's say that pod is scheduled. That pod is scheduled in this node, 206 node. Let's say that pod is scheduled in this 206 node, which means does both the containers got created and running in that node only? Whatever node that pod is scheduled, yes. Now let's say I have this one. Now I have this one. Something like this. I have one application running on 8080, another container running on 80. Both are running in a same pod. Let's say both are running in a same pod. Now this guy want to reach this guy. Do we need to use any pod IP, cluster IP? I mean to say that service IP or node IP like that. If this guy has to communicate with this guy, not required. How can I test whether those can communicate with each other? Can I go inside any one of the pod container? I mean to say, can I go inside this kubectl exec -it, that pod name -bash? Since I have two containers, in which container this bash will be interactively executed? Whatever is there in the 0th position in the containers. 0th position in the containers. When I am creating that pod manifest, which one is in the 0th position? Is Nginx container is there, or that Java web app container is there in the 0th position? The Java web app. Now, if you see, is it defaulted to this container out of these two? Is it defaulted to this container out of these two? Now I may get some issue. Let's see. It may throw timeout. Let's see. It is hung. Let's see. So it is defaulted to this one. Now I am getting a timeout because I might not have opened the ports properly. I need to check because yesterday my account got suspended. I created a cluster again. If that ports are not opened properly, I may not able to access the required ports. Is it saying it is timeout on this port 10250 on this IP? When I am executing kubectl exec, why it is reaching 206? Because that pod is running on which node? Why it is reaching 206? Because when I am executing kubectl exec on this pod, why it is reaching 206? Because is that pod is running on that node. And what is this 10250? 10250, what port is it? Kubelet port. So to execute this command on that pod container, is it reaching that kubelet which is running on that node? Maybe there is a problem here because of the ports. Let me see that. Now here, let me see. All traffic, all protocol 172.31.0.0.16 is opened here. Here, is it opened properly, guys? If you see in this node, is that ports are opened properly? If you see, this is in the 206. In the security group, I have not opened properly. There is a typo. So that's why it is not able to reach. Let me edit this security group. Let me edit this security group because one is missing, that 172.31.0./16, because one was missing last time. So that's why it was throwing a timeout. Now let me do this. Now, is it a defaulted to this one out of these two? And am I inside that pod, inside that container now? Now, here, if I do like this, just curl local host port is 80. So I no need to mention, even though I don't mention on which port request goes on local host. I'm inside this container. I'm inside this container, even though I don't mention this local host 80, request goes on 80. Now am I getting a response from the other container, that Nginx container, which is running on port 80? So here, do I need to use that pod IP or node IP, anything? Do I need to use this one to reach within the container? If I want to reach within the pod, if I want to reach one application with other application, you no need to use pod IP also. You no need to use pod IP. Even though I'm using IP, it is working. But do I need to use pod IP? Can I refer directly local host? Local host is enough. So this is how one container can communicate with other container in a same pod. But now how this will happen? Now let's say I have another application, another pod. This pod has to reach the container which is running in this pod. How we can access? If this pod, or maybe the pod is in the same node also, how we can reach from this application to that application? This one has to reach this one. If I use local host, do you think it will work? If I use here local host, do you think it will work to reach this one? Or from here, if I want to reach this one? No. We can use pod IPs, but is it recommended to use pod IPs as we already discussed yesterday? No. In that case, can I create a service of type cluster IP? Can I use that service name? Yes, I can use the service name. Now, if you see, let me take same example only. I have this pod. I have this pod, this application. This application pod want to reach the applications here. So can I use the service name? Can I use the service name? Now this pod want to reach this application, this application. Can I use the respective services? Can I use this service in this code in this pod? If I want to reach this pod, can I use this service name in this pod? Yes. Let me show that. I want to test. So can I go again like this? kubectl exe-it. But if I want to go to the specific container, can I use -c and that other container name? If I want to go inside that Nginx container instead of that Java web app, can I use this -c Nginx container like this? If I want to go anything, fine. Now it is saying the name is not correct. The container name is not correct. If required, can I describe the pod and see that? If required, can I describe that pod and see that? So here, now how many containers are part of this pod now? You can see here, 2. So this is my container name. Let's say I'll do something like this. Anything is fine. Now I am inside this one. Now if I want to do curl-v, that service name, this service name and service port, and my application context, maven-web-application. Now why I am not able to reach? Why I am not able to reach from this pod? from this pod, why I am not able to reach this pod using this service? Now, because the namespace. Now, whatever pod I am trying to access, this is in which namespace, guys? This is in which namespace? This is in which namespace? Default. This pod and service is in which namespace? This pod and this service is in which namespace? Other namespace. So, how I can reach applications or services from one namespace to other namespace? I can still use service name only, but I need to use FQDN. I need to use FQDN. What do you mean by FQDN? I have to use FQDN. FQDN. What do you mean by FQDN? Fully qualified domain name. Fully qualified domain name. But if the parts and services are in same namespace, yesterday was I able to reach from here and here, from this pod, am I able to communicate with this pod using service name without FQDN also? Without FQDN also, just only with service name? Yes. But because is this one and this one is in same namespace? This one and this one is in same namespace. This pod and this service, everything is in same namespace. So that's why I no need to use FQDN. But now this is my source, this is my destination. Is both are in same namespace? No. Here do I need to use a FQDN, fully qualified domain name? The fully qualified domain name will be something like this: service name dot namespace name dot svc dot cluster dot local. So this is the fully qualified domain name. Now from this pod I want to reach this service. Now what is the FQDN? Service name is this. What is the namespace? In which namespace I have this service? test-ns. Then can I use like this? Service name, namespace name, then .svc .cluster .local. Instead of using just a service name, can I use the FQDN of that service, fully qualified domain name of that service, like this? Now if you see, now I am using this one. Instead of just a service name, I am using fully qualified domain name, and service port is 80, my application context. Am I able to access now? I have to use forward slash, because 302 is a redirection. So it is redirecting to some other path. You can use curl with option L. L will again invoke that redirected URL. You can use curl with option L, or you can use that forward slash yourself. Now it is redirected to different path. This is redirected to different path. Again, that is also invoked because I use -L. If you are not using -L, you can use something like this. Now am I able to reach that application from the pod which is there in a different namespace? This is very, very important, guys. In the interviews, in the work also, you are going to use these type of things. Is everyone clear how one container can communicate with another container if they are in a same pod? How one pod can communicate with other pod using service if they are in a same namespace? If they are in a same namespace, is it mandatory to use FQDN like this? If they are in a same namespace, is it mandatory to use FQDN like this? But even though you use FQDN, will it cause any problem? Even though they are in same namespace, even though you use FQDN, will it cause any problem? No. But if it is in a different namespace, do I need to mandatorily use FQDN within the cluster also? One pod has to communicate with other pod. They are in a two different namespaces. Can I use FQDN like this? Do I need to worry about what IPs are what is the pod IPs, what is the cluster IP, like that within the cluster if I want to access? No. Is everyone clear, guys? How it works? Now let me come out of this container. This is about service. But if I want to access from outside of this cluster, then can I use that node port? That node port. Suppose I want to access these ports. I created service. Can I use respective service port like this? Now, if I want to access this application, which is in a default namespace, do I need to create a service also for this pod? But if that pod has two containers, can I create a two service mappings? If I want to access both containers from outside or inside, can I create a service like this? Oh, sorry. Now I can do here something like this. API version v1 kind what service metadata, something like this. You give name, some name, any name, spec. If I want to access outside or inside, only inside, cluster IP. You want to access inside and outside both, then node port. Here selector, app, whatever I have used here. Now here ports. Now I can do something like this: port 80, target port 8080, like this. But is it possible for me to map this one also like this? Again, can I use same port again, service port? Can I do something like this? Single service, is this possible? For single service, is this possible? Again, like this. Is this correct? Is it going to allow this port and this port? No. If required, can I have this one as a separate service and this one as a separate service if required? Two different services, points to same pod, this one as a separate service, like this, and another like this, something like this, some unique name. Can I have something like this? Is this possible? Again, this is separate service with this mapping. This is separate service with this mapping. Is this possible? Yes. But instead of doing like this, single service, is this possible? Single service, is this possible? On same service port? No. But if required, can I do something like this? Service port 8080, target port 8080, service port 80, target port 80. Is this possible? Is this possible? Yes, this is possible. So if I have done like this, when I am accessing this service name without mentioning any port, request goes to port 80. Is it going to forward the traffic to that Nginx container port? If I don't use any port, if this is my service, is it going to route the traffic to the container which is running in that pod on port 80? If I don't use any port, yes. But if I use like this, is it going to route the traffic to service on this port? Is it going to route the traffic to respective target port? Are you guys clear what I'm trying to say here? Can I create a service like this? Service port is 8080, target port is 8080. Service port is 80, target port 80. Like this. If required. Like this. Is it allowed? Let me show you. kubectl apply -f. I am creating a service. Line number 11, there is a issue. Guys, when you are using multiple resources, don't get confused with this line number 11. So line number 11, do you think this is the line number 11? Are you thinking here you have a problem? No. So if you see, it is saying this is fine, but another object line number 7, it is throwing a problem. So do you mean line number 7 is here? Here, this is the line number 7 in that respective thing. We have a problem there. Now let me apply. And one more important thing, when I am using multiple ports like this, when I am defining multiple ports like this, name is also mandatory. Name is also mandatory. I need to use one more property called a name. But when I am defining a single port mapping, is this name is mandatory? No. But here, can I say something like this, Tomcat port, and can I say this one, some name, some name. Can I say Nginx port, something like this, some name, anything. You can give ABC or XYZ also, anything. So let me apply. Now if you see, why I can see two like this? Because I created a service of type node port. Now if I want to access from outside, if I use this port, is it going to route the traffic to the Java web application container? If I use this node port, and if I use this node port, is it going to route the traffic to the Nginx container which is running in a same pod? From outside. But inside, let's say now this application or this application want to reach this application, can they still use that service name? Now kubectl. Now let's say this pod or this pod want to reach the application which is running in this pod. There are two containers. There is a service also created. Now, can I use this service name and respective service port? If I use this service name and this service port, is it going to reach this pod? Within that pod, is it going to route the traffic to that Java web app container, the Tomcat container? If I use this service name and this port, yes. If I use same service name and this port, is it going to route the traffic to that Nginx container which is running in a same pod, this pod? Yes. Let me show that. kubectl exec-it. Now I am going any one of the pod. But this one is in which namespace, guys? This pod is in which namespace? In test namespace. So do I need to use -n option here? Otherwise it will throw error. No pod found with that name. Now here, can I do something like this? If I am just using service name, it is not working. Do I need to use FQDN? Because this Nginx pod is in different namespace. This service and this pod is in different namespace. Do I need to use FQDN? Now what is the FQDN now? What is the FQDN now? Test svc dot what? Test svc dot what now? Default, because this is in default namespace, dot svc dot cluster dot local. Since I am not using any service port, do we already have some port, default port which is created on that one? Is this service is created in some default port 80? Now if I don't use this port also, is request is going to Nginx container and am I getting the response from that Nginx container, because that service port is targeted to container port 80. Now other application I want to access, can I use something like this? Port 8080. Am I getting that Tomcat home page response? Now within that I have this application. Maven hyphen. This is not Maven application. Which application I deployed? I think I have deployed a different app. So am I getting a response from that application container, the Tomcat container now, when I'm using this service port? Is everyone clear, guys? What is service? How to reach service from same namespace? How to reach service from other namespaces? And if I have a multiple containers, how can I create a service if there are multiple containers in the same pod? Is everyone clear all these combinations? This is very, very important. Now, let's come back to the actual pod concept. Let's come back to the actual pod concept. As we already discussed yesterday, let's understand the life cycle of the pod. Let's understand the life cycle of the pod. Guys, one more important thing. Is it recommended to keep on deploying lot of pods like this? If you don't have enough resources, is it recommended to deploy lot of applications? Again, now, how many pods we can create, how many pods or how many containers we can create, that depends on what again? How many pods we can deploy in that cluster is depends on what again? Based on the system resources, based on the available resources you have. Now, let me tell you one thing. What is the cluster capacity? Currently, what is my cluster capacity? What is my cluster capacity, or how much resources I have in the cluster, or how much resources? Resources is like CPU, memory, like this. How much resources you have available in the cluster? What is your cluster capacity? As what is your total cluster capacity? So people are saying 3 nodes. I am not asking 3 nodes. I am asking about the cluster capacity. How much resources you have in the cluster? Nodes are different, resources are different. So how much resources I have total? Now nodes, I have total 3 nodes. That is fine. But capacity of my cluster, I have one master node. What is the capacity of that master node? What type of system I have created? Master node is T2 dot medium. So how much CPU, how much memory? T2 dot medium, how much CPU, how much memory? 4 GB RAM and 2 CPU. Two workers. So T2 dot micro I am using. So each 1 GB, 1 CPU, total 2 systems. So total 2 systems. So is it like this? Total 6 GB RAM, my cluster capacity 6 GB, and CPU is 4 CPU, because 2 workers 2 GB plus 4 GB of master 6 GB and 4 CPU. Can I call this as my cluster capacity, cluster resources? Now, is this complete 6 GB is available for you? Is this complete 6 GB is available for you? No. Is some CPU, some memory is used by your operating system container runtime? Is container D is taking some CPU memory, your operating system is taking some CPU memory, system available, system reserved. Does that system is reserved some CPU and memory for operating system and a container runtime? We have something available. If I keep deploying lot of pods, does each container will take some CPU and memory? When I'm creating a pod will have a container. Does container will take some CPU and memory? If you are keep on deploying lot of pods and containers, does your cluster will impact? Which means, does your nodes also gets impacted? Your kubelet will run out of memory or CPU. Your operating system may run out of CPU or memory. If your kubelet is running out of CPU and memory, does kubelet will function as expected? No. If kubelet is not functioning as expected, does master will be able to communicate with that kubelet? Does that system will be shown as ready? No. So is it recommended to deploy lot of applications, lot of pods if you don't have enough CPU and memory? No. But if I want to do this, if I want to prevent this, can I do the resource request and limits? I mean to say, whenever I am creating a pods, can I say, as of now, I am not requesting anything. I am not requesting anything. I am not limiting anything. While creating a pods, resource quota is different. Now, even though my cluster capacity is this much, can I create a resource quota for namespace with 20 GB, 20 CPU? Does the resource quota will check whether you have this much available or not? No. Resource quota will not check. Resource quota will not check. But as a best practice, do you need to manually verify whether you have this much CPU, this much memory available? Before you create a resource quota, do you need to cross check whether do I have this much resources are available when you are setting the resource quota? Do I need to check whether that much system resources are available? If not, you can add additional nodes, then create a resource quota. Resource quota will not check. But when I am using resources in my pod, manifest like this, resources, let's say request, is it going to check, is kubelet is going to check whether you have this much CPU memory available or not in any node? Already some parts reserved. Let's say already some parts reserved this much. Is it going to calculate sum of all the containers resource request, sum of all the existing containers resource request should be less than available resources? If this is the case, available resources in that node. If this is the case, then only it will schedule. Suppose already I have lot of pods, this much resource requests are already used. If that is not available, after summing all the container resource request and comparing with system request, system capacity, if it is very less, the scheduler will schedule. First of all, will it schedule that pod if you don't have that much? No. In that case, does that pod goes to pending state? Does that pod goes to pending state saying that there is no resources available? So even though I'm deploying lot of pods, is it recommended to use this resource request so that it will prevent scheduling lot of pods if you don't have enough CPU memory available in the node? Will it prevent that at least? Now I am not using this resource request and limits. Is it checking how much you are requesting and how much it is available in the nodes? Is it checking actually now? Since I am not using this, no. So if I keep deploy like this, will it cause issues in your cluster? Does your cluster will break? Does your cluster will crash? Yes. So resource quota is just a limit how much you can create in that namespace. But does resource quota will actually check whether that much is available or not in the cluster? No. But when I am using resources at a pod level, when I am using resource request, especially this resource request, does kubelet will check in the background? Is it going to do something like this? This container is requesting this much. It will check in each node already how many containers are there and each container how much they reserved. Will it sum all the container requests and it will subtract with the system resources, and if there is enough space after that, then only it will schedule. Otherwise, will it place in a pending state? Will it be in a pending state? That pod will be in a pending state? Yes. Guys, don't deploy too many applications and mess up your cluster. If you are keep on deploying without using all these concepts, does your worker machines will break? Does your master machines may break? because it will run out of CPU and memory. Is everyone clear? What is this resource quota and what is especially this resource request? Why this is very important? Okay. If you are not using this one, don't apply too many applications while practicing. If you are not using all these things, don't apply too many parts like this. So can you delete and apply? Maybe you can apply multiple applications, but you can delete other applications and apply. Okay. Again, here also they will ask how many nodes you have in the cluster. You are using Kubernetes cluster. How many nodes you have in the cluster? What is the capacity of each node? Again, that depends on what, guys. Here I have taken just very less number of nodes and with very less capacity. In the actual applications, I am going to have like this, just two machines with 1 GB RAM, 1 core CPU again. No. So that is what number of nodes, the capacity of each node is depends on what? That is depends on how many pods you want to deploy, each pod, how many containers, each container, how much CPU, how much memory you are looking. Based on that, do you need to have a nodes in the cluster? Suppose I want to deploy, let's say, let's say, approximately 600 pods. I think I have already told this one. Each pod, let's say, each pod has maybe one container. Each pod may have one container, and that container is requesting maybe 1 GB RAM and one CPU. That is minimum it is requesting. Maximum it can go to 2 GB and 2 CPU. Just to give an example, this can be 4 CPU also. Now, do I need to calculate 600 pods? They are expecting this much, they are expecting this much CPU. So do I need to have minimum something like approximately 1500 GB of RAM memory in the cluster? Do I need to have at least maybe like 1200 or 1300 CPUs in the cluster? If this is the case, I want to deploy these many pods. Each pod has one container. On an average, they are looking this much. So do I need to have this much CPU, this much memory available in the cluster? In that case, can I go something like this? Maybe 10 nodes or 20 nodes, each node 128 GB RAM, and each node having maybe 64 core processor like that, 64 core or 128 core, whatever, like this. Now, tomorrow you want to deploy a lot of other applications. Then do I need to add enough nodes to my cluster? Let's say later I want to deploy a lot of other applications in the same cluster. Now, do I need to make sure again I need to add some additional nodes to deploy these many pods? If I don't add additional nodes, if I don't add resources, if I deploy other nodes, if you are using resources concept, resource request and limits concept, is that parts will get scheduled if you don't have enough CPU, enough memory? First of all, no, it is not going to schedule if you are using resource request concept. But if you are not using this resource request concept, does kubelet will allow to schedule that parts? If you are not using that resource request concept, the kubelet will allow to schedule the parts. If it is allowed, is that existing parts will get impacted? Is that existing application gets impacted? Because the existing parts will run out of the CPU and memory. Because these new parts also will start taking CPU and memory. Does that existing parts will impacted? Yes. Your nodes also gets impacted. This is general common sense, guys. This is general minimum common sense. You need to apply. You no need to be expert here. If you think this is normal, plain mathematics are normal requirement, but people are saying, sir, in the interviews they are asking like this, what to say, how many nodes you have, how much storage you are using, how much CPU you have. Everything is depends on what you guys are calling as a real time. That is not a real time, that is a use case or requirement. Everything is based on the requirement. whether it is a infrastructure, whether it's a servers, whether it's a storage, whether it's a Jenkins pipeline or Docker file, is everything as per the requirements I need to write and implement? Whether it's a infrastructure like a server, storage, whether it's an application like Jenkins, Docker, as per the requirement, we need to do this. Is everyone clear? In the interviews, if they ask how many nodes, how many pods, how many namespaces, how many clusters, is everyone clear how to answer all these things? Now, let's come back to the pod concept now. Let's come back to the pod concept now. As we already discussed, the pod life cycle, the pod life cycle, pod life cycle. We will make a pod request to the API server. We are making a pod request to the API server using pod manifest file. Is that API server is a request, saving that information in etcd? But before saving that information in etcd, is it doing some kind of a validation, authentication, authorization, and also validation? Yes. After all these things, the API server passes the information in etcd. Then scheduler. The scheduler comes into picture here. Scheduler will try to find unscheduled pods, whatever pods which are not scheduled, and will it assign a node to that unscheduled pods? Does that scheduler will decide in which node that pod can be scheduled? As I already told, is that scheduler is going to work with kubelet to identify how many pods you have already, and each pod, each container, how much request they have already used, resource request and limits. Will it do some kind of a mathematics in the background to identify whether I can fit this pod into that node or not? If you are using that resource request concepts, it will do some mathematics. The scheduler will work with kubelet and identify. Kubelet running on the node will see the pod is scheduled. Then the kubelet comes into picture. The kubelet fires a commands. If I am using Docker as a runtime, kubelet fire a Docker commands to pull the images and create a container. But if I am using different container runtime, does kubelet will work with that container runtime containerd? Will it fire a containerd related commands to pull the images and create a containers? Yes. The entire life cycle, state of the pod is stored where? The entire life cycle of the life cycle state of the pod is stored in the etcd. So we have a different status, pod status. One is pending, another one is crash loop back off, another one is image pull back off, or error image pull. One more is running, another one is the pod status, create container configurer, something like this, create container configurer, some configuration errors. We have these type of errors. Status, in which state it should be, so that my application will be up and running successfully in that pod, that container is successfully started in that pod. In which state my pod should be there, so that, which means my container, my pod is successfully deployed and my application is successfully running as and running successfully. If I see this in running state, then only you can consider that pod is deployed successfully and container in that pod is also running successfully. Now, if it is in a pending state, what does it mean? It is pending for some reason. It is pending for some reason. It is not scheduled. It's not scheduled. Why it is not scheduled? That can be any reason. It can be due to insufficient resources, or there could be some other reasons also. But if it is in a pending state, how can I troubleshoot? And how can I see whether it is, why it is in pending state? How can I troubleshoot why it is in pending state? Can I do something like this? kubectl describe kubectl describe pod, that pod name. I can describe that pod so that I can identify why it is in pending state. Does that control plane will give some reason why it is in pending state? Whether it is in pending state because of no resources available to schedule, or is it because of some other reason? Yes. But the pod itself is not scheduled. Can I see the logs of my pod, logs of my container? If it is in a pending state, will I able to see any logs of that pod or container? If it is in a pending state, will I able to see any logs? No, because first of all, that is not scheduled at all. So I don't see the logs of my pod container. I can describe and see. What do you mean by crash loop backup? What do you mean by crash loop backup? For some reason, your container is not coming up successfully. There is some code issue or configuration issue in the image. Your container process is not able to come up successfully. Does Kubernetes will try to start that container multiple times? It is trying to start the container, but the container is not coming up. There is some issue with your code or application in the image. So it is trying to start that process, container process, it is not coming up. Does Kubernetes will again try to start that process, that container process in the pod? Yes. It is going to keep on trying, but your container process is not successfully come up because of some code issue or application issue. In that case, can I see that pod in a crash loop backup? I can see that pod in a crash loop backup. Instead of running, I can see here as a crash loop backup. Here will I able to see number of restarts are getting increased. Sometimes it will show 1, again it will try 2, 3, 4 like that. It is keep on trying to start the container, but container is not coming up because of code issue or configuration issue. In that case, do we need to see the logs and work with the developers? If it is an issue with their process is not coming up successfully, do we need to troubleshoot and ask the developers if it is a code issue, that image issue? So I need to work. This time I can describe the pod as well. I can describe the pod as well. And also, can I execute logs? Because pod is scheduled and container is not coming up. Within that pod, container is not coming up. Can I see the logs of that pod container? If I execute kubectl logs pod name, is it going to show the logs which is part of that pod container? If again there are two containers, can I see -c that container name if I want to see the logs of specific container like this? This is very, very important. Troubleshooting. Now, crash loop backup. Is everyone clear? Sometimes in the interviews also they are asking, what is crash loop backup? What do you mean? How do you troubleshoot crash loop backup? What could be the reason? The reason for crash loop backup is your container process is not successfully started. That could be because of some issue in the code or image. In that case, do you need to fix that code or that image? Do I need to recreate an image with correct code, correct softwares? Then do I need to redeploy that application to fix the crash loop backup? Yes. Then what is this error image pull? We already discussed what is this error image pull. Not able to pull the image for two reasons. What is that reason? Wrong registry details. If it is a private registry, if you are not authenticating also, will you get a same message? Even though your registry is correct, but it is private image and you are not authenticating. Same problem. If it is a running, no issues. What do you mean by this create container config error? There are some more Kubernetes concepts like config maps and secrets. You are referring config maps and secrets in your pod, and you don't have those config maps and secrets created in the cluster. You are referring config maps and secrets in your pod manifest, and you are not creating, or you don't have that config maps or secrets created in the cluster, in that case, can I see this type of error? Create container config error as a status of my pod. So what is config map? What is secret? I will explain later. But is everyone clear? What is what? What do you mean by running? What do you mean by crash loop backup? What do you mean by pending? How to troubleshoot if the pods are in that respective status? If the pod status is, this is important. That is what we do in our day-to-day life. Developers will try to deploy their applications as a pods, as a containers in Kubernetes. If there is something wrong with cluster, you don't have enough CPU, enough resources available in the cluster, then do you need to troubleshoot and add enough resources to the cluster so that that application gets deployed? Otherwise, there is a issue with your code. It will be in a crash loop backup. Do you need to troubleshoot and identify the problem and work with the developers to fix that problem if it is application code issue? Yes. So troubleshooting is very, very important. If some nodes are not ready, if some nodes are not ready, will I able to describe and see why that node is not ready? Describe node, whether that node has a memory pressure, disk pressure. If nodes also, I can describe the node and see why that is a problem. Now, if you are not using this resources concepts, if you are not using this resource request concept, you are keep on deploying lot of pods. Does your kubelet will impact? If kubelet is impacted, does your node gets impacted? If your node gets impacted, whatever pods which is already running in that node, will it get impacted? Yes. So in that case, you do one thing. You delete all the applications whatever you deployed, but not in kube system namespace, guys. You delete something like this in the default namespace, and you delete something like this in other namespace. If you are not following that resource request concept, you delete something like this in default namespace and other namespace. Then you reboot your servers. You reboot your servers. First delete from the mask by executing this command, delete all the objects from default namespace and other namespace, but don't do in a kube system namespace. Then if you reboot your servers, since you have deleted the pods, after rebooting, does that pods get scheduled again because you have deleted completely? No. So does kubelet will be started properly? Does kubelet will have enough CPU, enough memory? Does kubelet will start automatically because we have a kubelet on bootstrap, like a brand new, like a brand new. But in real time, are you going to do like this? In real time, you are going to follow best practices. Are you going to use resource request concept? Are you going to use resource quota concept? Before you are creating a quota, are you going to make sure you have enough nodes, enough servers available in the cluster in real time? Are you going to use like a playground in real time, in actual clusters, in the actual environment? Are you going to use this like a playground? The whatever way you want to play, will you play like that? It is not like a playground, like a gully cricket. You will be playing like a professional cricketer, which means you need to use best practices. That is, we call it as a experience. That is called as a experience. That is called as an experience. That is called as a real time. So if you practice more, if you encounter these type of issues, what is the solution for these issues? How can I avoid these type of issues? If you are already doing while learning itself, do you have that real time, whatever you call it, or that experience to work in the actual environments also? You already have a knowledge on Kubernetes, how it works, how to troubleshoot, how to use best practices, what is resource quota, what is resources. If you already know, will it be difficult working or coping with actual environments in the real projects once you get into a job? No. It will be very simple. You can enjoy your job. You can enjoy your first job and salary. But but if you by heart, if you went through different ways, nowadays everyone is going through proxies. If you went through the job, if you went to the job through proxies, or if you went to by heart, you by hearted interview questions and you somehow you are able to crack the job. But do you have that happiness, or do you have that happiness, or will you able to cope up with that requirements and actual task? That is temporary. Again, you will look after people. Sir, I need a job support. Does anyone is available to support my day-to-day activities? I need a job support. So if you do all these things while learning itself, you don't need, guys. So understand the concept. The whole intention what I am trying to explain here is how system will work. If you know how system works, will you able to understand, troubleshoot, follow the best practices to prevent the failures. The system should not get failed if you follow the best practices. So all these things are important, that we call it as an experience. Okay. Now let's come back to the actual topic here. Pod concept. Pod is ephemeral. What do you mean by pod is ephemeral? Pod will last for less amount of time, which means pod can go down for any reason. Let's say if your node has issues, does this pod and container can go down? Suppose this server itself has issues, does this pod will work? No. Or even though this node is fine, you have a pod, for some reason this pod is failed. Do you think you will get another pod automatically? Or if this case happen, do you think this pod will get shifted to other node if I directly create a pod? No. So pod is ephemeral. Pod can go down for any reason, and it won't be scheduled to a new node once it dies. It won't schedule to new node once it dies, which means, is it recommended to create a pods directly? Is it recommended to create a pods directly? No. You should not create a pods directly. You should not create a pods directly. You should use, you have to use different objects. You have to use some controllers. You should not directly create a pods. Pods should be created and managed by some controllers. So we should not directly create the pods. We have to create the pods so that pods will be managed by that controller. So what are those controllers which I can use? One is replication controller. Another one is replica set. Another one is daemon set. Another one is deployment. Another one is stateful set, like this. So these are the controllers. We are going to use pods. We are going to schedule pods. But are we going to directly create a pods like this? Are we going to directly create a pods like this? Are you going to create a pods directly like this? No. We are going to create a pods, but are we going to use some controllers? That controllers will create and manage the pods also. It will manage the pods also. It will create the pods and it will look after the pods. If something goes wrong with that pod, is it going to reschedule or recreate that pod? If I created that pod using some controller, now will I able to scale up, scale down those pods? Will I able to define how many replicas I need, how many pods I need for that? Let's say 2 pods, 3 pods, 4 pods. So does that controller will create respect those many replicas, and will it make sure those many replicas are always available in the cluster if I create a pods with the help of those controllers? Yes. If you see, as of now, we have any controllers? Did we use any controllers to create and manage these pods? Whatever we deployed as of now, do we have any controllers like a replication controller, replica set, daemon set, or like a deployment like that? No. So for that reason, let's say something went wrong. I am intentionally deleting this pod. Are you going to get another pod automatically? That does it will be replicated? If I delete that pod, will it be replicated automatically? There is no pod. There is no pod. If someone is trying to access this service now, if someone is trying to access this service internally or externally, do you get any response? Do you get any response? Now the pod is deleted. Do you get any response? No. And this pod is directly created. Is anyone is looking after that pod? Is anyone is replicating or recreating that pod now? If you see, is that pod is getting replicated, recreated? No. Now, does this service has any endpoints now? Does that service has any endpoints? If someone is accessing from outside or inside using this service, does that service has any endpoint now? Will it work now? No. The whole purpose we are going for a Kubernetes is orchestration. The whole purpose we are going for Kubernetes is orchestration. Is orchestration is happening if I directly create the pods? No. So that's why it is not recommended to create a pods. But without understanding, without explaining what is pod, if I directly go for a controllers, do you guys able to understand? You need to understand container, you need to understand pod, then only you can understand the controllers. In real time, are you going to deploy like this pods directly? No. In real time, you are going to use these controllers, any one of these controllers, like a replication controller, replica set, daemon set, like that. But before I explain what is what, let's understand one more concept here: static pods. There is one more concept called static pods. In the interviews also, they are asking what is static pod. What is static pod? There is a one more concept here called static pods. Before I explain these controllers, let's explain what is static pod. Now, if you see, guys, if you see, I already have some pods in the kube system namespace. I already have some pods in the kube system namespace. I am trying to get all. Now, if you see, do I have some controllers like this, daemon sets, deployments, like this? I'm trying to get all the objects. Do I have some controllers like daemon sets, deployments here? If you observe these pods, kubeproxy pods, these kubeproxy pods, is this pods is created and managed by which one now? I have some pods running in that namespace in the cluster. These pods are managed by whom? Do I have a one controller called daemon set, kubeproxy daemon set? Is this daemon set is creating and managing these pods? This kubeproxy pods, you can see decide 3, current 3, ready 3, like that. And also these viewnet pods, is this viewnet pods are created and managed by this daemon set? Yes. And if you see, there are some core DNS pods. Core DNS pods. Is that core DNS pods are created and managed by this deployment? Deployment will internally create a replica set. I will come to that point. Deployment will internally create a replica set. Replica set is managing these pods. So do you have a controllers for these pods like core DNS, kubeproxy, scheduler, sorry, not scheduler, VNet and all these things? Yes. But if anything goes wrong with this one, am I getting the parts automatically? Guys, don't delete this in the actual servers. First demonstrating, I'm deleting. I'm deleting this pod, kube system pod. Now if you see, if I check again, will I have again two pods, two replicas? Because this is expected to maintain two pods, two replicas. When I again see, is that pod is created automatically? If you see again, is it created again? So who is looking after those pods? Do I have some deployment? That deployment is internally created a replica set. That replica set is looking after that. Similarly, if these parts are deleted, this kube proxy, kube viewnet parts are deleted, do you have some controllers which will manage those pods, daemon sets? But I will come to this. I will explain what is the difference between daemon set, deployment, replica set, all these things I will come and discuss later. But are you guys clear? What is this controllers? What is the job of that controllers? Basically, those are also APIs in the Kubernetes. Can I create and manage the parts using those APIs, those controllers? Yes. Now, if you observe, your Kubernetes control plane is also running as a pod. Your API server, your control manager, your scheduler, your etcd also running as a pod. But do you guys observe any controllers for these pods? Is these pods are controlled by any controller here? Do you see any controller for etcd, API server, control manager here? Do you have any controllers like daemon sets, deployments, replica sets? No. But who will look after these pods? Who will look after these pods? These pods are called as a static pods. These pods are called as a static pods. What do you mean by static pod? What is static pod? Sometimes in the interview also they'll ask. Let me explain what is static pod before I go for a controller. So static pods are managed directly by the kubelet. Static pods are directly managed by the kubelet. What is kubelet? Agent. Agent which is running in that node. Static pods are directly managed by that kubelet. Does API server have any control over these pods, those static pods? Does your control manager, I mean to say, does your API server have any control on those static pods? No. We can see the static pods using API server. We are able to see the static pods using API server, but does API server have any control on those static pods? No. So kubelet is responsible. Kubelet is responsible for watching each static pod, and is it going to restart if it is crashed or if it is down? That static pod went down. Is kubelet is responsible for watching and again making sure that that static pod is created again? Yes. So the static pod running on each node is visible on API server. We can see the static pods using APIs, but does those static pods can be controlled by API server? Which means the static pods has any control from API server? No. The static pods, to make it simple, the static pod will not have, will have any controllers associated. To make it simple, does the static pods will have any associated controllers like replication controller, replica sets, or daemon sets, or deployments like that? No. So static pod will not have any associated replication controller or replica sets or daemon set. So who is going to watch and who is going to manage those static pods? The kubelet itself will watch it and manage the static pods. What is the main use of static pods? What is the whole purpose of static pods? The main use or main purpose of the static pods is to run the control plane itself. To run the control plane. Because that control plane is managing your cluster. Do we need someone to manage that control plane? Pods. That control plane is managing your pods. Do I need someone to manage the control plane? Does control plane can manage control plane itself? Does they can manage themselves? No, right? So the complete cluster is managed by control plane. Do I need someone to manage that control plane? If something goes wrong with etcd, API server, or scheduler, does those things to be recreated automatically in that node? Yes. So what is the main purpose of the static pod? The main purpose of the static pod is to run the control plane. In other words, the control plane is managed by kubelet. That is static pod. Can I call all these things as a static pods? You can see API server, control manager, scheduler. Do I have any controllers associated here? No. This control manager, this control manager, this API server, this scheduler, this etcd. I can see the IP address also along with my pod name. These are static pods. Now, don't do this in the actual servers, but let me do here. kubectl delete. I am deleting this pod itself. I'm deleting this pod, this API server pod. If this API server goes down, anyone will be able to communicate with APIs again to deploy or manage anything? No. But am I getting pod automatically again, that API server? If you see, again immediately my API server is back. Who is looking after that API server? Who is looking after that API server? Kubelet. Now, is it possible for us to create a static pods? Sometimes in the CKA exam also, certified Kubernetes administrator also, they will ask you to create some static pod. Is it possible for me to create a static pod? How to create a static pod? Now, I want to create a static pod on specific node. Let's say I have these many nodes. I want to create a static pod on the master, or I want to create a static pod in this worker. How can I create a static pod? We have one file, one folder, etc kubernetes manifests. So this is my master, 245. You can see my master. I am in the master only, 245. In that master node, I have one folder called etc kubernetes manifest. If I place that pod YML, if I place that pod YML in this folder, can I consider that as a static pod? Does kubelet will use this file and will it create a static pod? Now, if I want to create a static pod on this node, if I want to create a static pod on this node, can I go to this node, 206 node, and can I place that pod.yaml file in that node in this folder? So the kubelet running in that node, will it create a static pod in that node, 206 node? Yes. Now, let me show you. Now, let me show you. I'm just creating one YML. I'm just creating one YML like this, just to give an example. Nginx, something like this. I am creating one file like this. Kind is pod metadata metadata name. I'm just giving something like this. Namespace also, if you want to mention, you can mention. Labels also, if you want to mention. Now spec. I'm saying containers. Name Nginx. Image Nginx. Ports. Container port, like this. Now if this is just a YML in the current folder. Now if I place this YML in this server, in this folder, does kubelet will take that pod manifest and will it create a pod and manage that pod? Can I call that as a static pod now? If I place this YML, let me do that. I am copying this file to that location, Kubernetes manifest location. I am copying that file now to that location. Now if you see, can I call this as a static pod? Now, since I have not mentioned namespace, in which namespace this pod is getting created? In default namespace. in default namespace. Now this is static pod. Now if this pod is down, if you see that pod is also created in which node? In whatever node I have placed that manifest file. Is it created in the same node? I have placed that manifest file in the 245. That is my master. Is that pod is created in the master itself? Now, even though I delete this pod, or for some reason this pod goes down, does this pod will be created automatically? If you see, is that pod is recreated automatically? Because that is a static pod. Who is looking after those static pods? Who is looking after those static pods? The kubelet, directly kubelet. Now, if I want to remove that static static pod, carefully remove that file, guys. Don't remove any other files. If you remove these files, if you remove other files like this, whatever you have here, if you remove this etcd file or API server file, control manager or scheduler, will it impact your cluster? Does your control plane will be deleted automatically? So carefully do that. Don't delete unnecessarily all the files. Just I am deleting this file nginx pod.yaml. Now is that pod is deleted, that static pod? Do you see? Do I have that static pod now? No. But are we going to deploy all our applications also as a static pods? Are we going to directly use these static pods to deploy our applications? No. That is only for control plane. Only for control plane. Now our applications, can I deploy it as a normal pods? Can I deploy it as a normal pods? Our applications? Yes. But instead of deploying directly pods, can I use controllers like a replication controller, replica set, or daemon set like that, so that those controllers will deploy and manage your pods? Yes. Is everyone clear what is static pod? Sometimes in the interviews also they are asking what is static pods and how it works. What is the whole purpose of static pod? Is everyone clear? In the CKA exam also they will ask you to create a static pods on so and so node. So in the CKA exam also they'll say go and create a static pod in this node. In that case, do you need to understand what is static pod and how to create a static pod also? Yes. Now, before I go for a controllers, let's understand this labels and selectors concept. We already use these labels and selectors, but let's understand these labels and selectors first. What is label in general? In general, what is label? In Kubernetes, we call it as a tags. Is tags also similar to labels in Kubernetes? For easy identification in AWS, can I add a tags to my AWS resources? Labels and tags are similar, right? Just a key value pairs. Now, in Kubernetes also, can I add a labels to my Kubernetes resources? Like if I want to add a label to the node, I can add. If I want to add a label to the namespace, I can add. If I want a labels to the pod, I can add. For any Kubernetes object or resource, can I add a labels? Yes. So labels are key value pairs. Labels are key value pairs attached to the Kubernetes object. Can I use whatever keys, whatever values I want to use? You can make your own and apply, right? It's like a tagging. It's like a tag in the Kubernetes. It is like a tagging things in our Kubernetes, like labels, key value, key value, key value, right? So when one thing in Kubernetes, needs to find another thing in Kubernetes, can we use this label concept? In Kubernetes, one thing in the sense one object needs to find another objects in Kubernetes. Can I use this labels and selectors concept? Yes, we are already using. So we can add a labels. Can I use selectors? Selectors will use the label key to find a collection of objects. We can use selectors. In the selectors, we can use the label keys to find the collection of objects with matched value. It's like a filter or query. It's like a filter or condition or query to your labels. These selectors is like a condition or query or filter to your labels. So selectors like this. Now these labels and selectors are used in many places. Already we used these labels. Am I adding a labels to the pods? Am I using those labels in my service as a selectors so that service will find matching pods, collection of pods? So these labels and selectors are used in many places. This is very, very important also. So why the key values are not same? You can give app colon app, but does it make any sense? If you take anything, this key and this value also you can use same. Does it make any sense to you? Like if I say app role env, does it make any sense? You can use key also as a app, value also as a app. That will not make any sense, right? Is there any way you can uniquely identify if I give app as app, role as role, env as env, like that? No, it's a key value pairs, key and value as per your wish. Now this we already used, but I thought of explaining. Now let's continue with controllers. Now we already discussed this service, guys. What is service of type cluster IP, what is node port. I'll come to this one later. We cannot create a service of type load balancer. I cannot create a service of type load balancer now, because it's not a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's a self-managed Kubernetes cluster. If I try to create a service of type load balancer, will I get this outside my cluster? Will I have external load balancer like ELB? Does that ELB will be created automatically, that external load balancer outside of your cluster? No. This will not work now. I'll come to this point later. What is this cluster, service of type load balancer? I'll come and discuss this later. For now, let's proceed with replication controller. Now, what is replication controller? Replication controller is also one Kubernetes object. Replication controller is also one Kubernetes object. kubectl API resources. I want to filter like a grep because I don't want to see lot of list. API resources, there is a typo. Now do I have one object called replication controller? I'm just grepping, guys, so that I can match only that one. Otherwise you can no need to grep. Now do I have that one object called replication controller? Here one Kubernetes API called replication controller. Now the namespace is true, which means is that object, is that replication controller can be created in a namespace level? Is it a namespace resource or a cluster resource? It's a namespace level, namespace resource. And what is the API version for that replication controller? V1. In the short form, in the short name, can I call that as RC? RC stands for what? Replication controller. Now, what is replication controller? Replication controller is one of the key feature of Kubernetes. Replication controller is one of the key feature of Kubernetes. What is it? What it does? What is replication is going to do? Replication controller is responsible for what? Responsible for managing the pod life cycle. It is responsible for managing the pod life cycle. So is it responsible for making sure that the specified number of pod replicas are always running? Is it going to make sure that specified number of pod replicas are running at any point of time in the cluster? Is it going to make sure specified number of pod replicas are always running at any point of time? If something goes wrong with that replica, is it going to replicate again? Which means, is it going to recreate and restart again that pod? Yes. So it is going to manage the pod life cycle. Does replication controller will enable you to create a multiple pods, which means multiple replicas? Does this replication controller will enable you to create a multiple pods, multiple replicas like this? By specifying like this number of replicas as 2, with this information, how many pods will be created? With this information, how many pods will be created? With the same pod specification, with this pod specification, how many pods will be created? 2. If required, can I say 3 replicas, 4 replicas, based on your requirement, based on the load? Based on your requirement, based on the load, can I say 3 replicas, 4 replicas, like that? Yes. So replication controller will enable you to create a multiple pods. Then is it going to make sure that the number of pods always exist? Kind of a desired state reconciliation. You are expecting these replicas. For some reason, one of the replica went down, one of the pod went down. Is it going to again do the desired state reconciliation? Is it going to replicate again? So it is going to do the desired state reconciliation. That we call it as an orchestration. If pod crashes, does that replication controller will replace it? And again, the pod and replication controllers are again associated using what? How replication controller will make sure those pods are exist or not? Again, is it going to use a concept of labels and selector? The way we are using selectors in service, does replication controller also will use selectors to identify whether we have those pods or not? Yes. So if I create a replication controller with replica as 1, does it mean always one pod is available? If I create a replication controller with replica as 1, does it mean always my pod will be available, one pod? If instead of 1, if I say 2, does always 2 pods will be available? Yes. As of now, do I have any replication controller created in the default namespace or any other namespace? Our test namespace? In our test namespace, no. Is these pods are created? I have a pods, but is these pods are created and managed by replication controller? This one in that namespace and this one in that namespace. Is these pods are created and managed by any controller? No. So is it recommended to create a pods directly? No. Now if I use replication controller, does that replication controller will create and manage the pod? Yes. Now, is it possible for me to scale the pods? I created a replication controller with 2 replicas. At any point of time, is it possible for me to replicate like this? Can I scale my pods from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 at any point of time also? Later also, based on the load, will I able to scale up, scale down the number of replicas of that controller? Yes. These 2 types of scalings. One is manual scaling, one is auto scaling. Will I able to manually increase and decrease the number of replicas? Manually, yes. Automatically, automatically, automatically. Also using auto scaling, pod auto scaler. Does Kubernetes support scaling the pods also automatically? Yes. Now, how to create a replication controller? Do I have something like this? Do I need to create a manifest like this? Replication controller manifest. Now, I don't want to create a pods directly. So we are not going to do like this. I am going to delete these pods, whatever I have created directly. It is not recommended to do this. Instead of creating a pods like this directly, instead of creating a pod like this, instead of pod, can I create a replication controller? to create this pod and manage the pod? Yes. So how to do that? How to do that? Again, API version, kind, metadata, and spec. Now kind, what kind of object I want to create? Replication controller. Replication controller. What is the API version for replication controller? I have given the table also, but you can refer from kubectl v1. Metadata, name. Whatever name I am going to give here, what is this name? Is this name is for pod or is this name for a replication controller? This is for a replication controller. RC name. Can I mention namespace also? In which namespace this replication controller has to be created? This replication controller, and in which namespace the associated pod should created? Yes, that can be any namespace. That can be any namespace as per your requirement. Now, can I add a labels also to the replication controller if required? These labels, is this labels will be added to your pods or is this labels will be added to this replication controller? These are for replication controller. Are we going to use these labels anywhere? Is it mandatory to define labels for replication controller? No, not required. It is not mandatory. It's up to you. Now, this is my replication controller specification. Am I going to have as is like this? Am I going to have as is like this? Am I going to have this as is like this? This is not pod specification. This is replication controller specification. Does these specifications will change based on the kind of object you are creating? Yes. Now here we have something like this. Replicas. Can I mention number of replicas? Number of pod replicas? How many pods you need? Number of pod replicas like this. Like whether you need a 1 replica, 2 replica, 3 replicas like this. Even though you don't mention this, what is the default number of pod replicas? If I don't mention this replicas field, what is the default number? 1. Now, template. What is this template, guys? This is your pod template. This is your pod template. Now, when I am creating a pod, whatever I am mentioning this one, when I am directly creating a pod, whatever I am mentioning like this metadata, spec, can I have this under this template? Under this template? This is my pod template. Can I have under this template like this? Under this template, again metadata. But here this is not allowed. Here this is not allowed. Under pod template, this namespace is not allowed because we are creating a replication controller. Does replication controller will use this pod template? Will it use this information to create a pod? Yes. So now under template again I have metadata. This is metadata for which one? Which is starting here. This is metadata for RC. I have again metadata, but this metadata is for which one? That is, I call it as a pod template. This is pod metadata. Can I give a name like this? Pod name. Labels. These labels are for which one? These labels, whatever I am using here, these labels are which one? These labels are basically pod labels. Now this specification. Here I have a specification. Here also I have a specification. This specification is your replication controller specification. This specification is under template, which is, can I call this as a pod specification? This is under pod template. This is under pod template. So this is your pod specification. So something like this. Your container name, your image name, your container port like this. Your container port like this. Your container port like this. Now, if I create a replication controller like this, is it going to use this information, whatever is there under pod template, and is it going to create based on number of replicas I have mentioned here? Is it going to create those many pods using this pod information? Yes. You are not directly creating a pod. Is pod is created and managed by replication controller. You are creating a replication controller. Replication controller is creating the pods and managing the pods using this information. Now, instead of having like this, I deleted that pod. Instead of pod, can I create a replication controller to create and manage that pods? Can I create something like this? Instead of pod, can I say replication controller? Now, this is your RC name. Can I give some name like this? These labels are for RC. These labels are for RC. It is not mandatory. I'm just mentioning the namespace. But is this correct? When you are creating a replication controller, is this correct? No, it is different. I have a replicas. I can say one replica. I have a template. I have a template. Within that template, do I have a metadata? Do I have a spec? Now, is this correct now? One second. Now here, under metadata, I can have a name. This name is for what? Pod. Can I mention labels? Whatever labels I am defining here, is this labels are for pod? Something like this. If these labels are already used as a selectors in your service, does that service will point to these pods? Whatever pods are created by this replication controller and managed by this replication controller, if I am using these labels in the service as a selectors, does that service will point to these pods, whatever is going to create and manage by replication controller? Yes. Now, if I do like this, how many pods will be created by this replication controller? How many pods this replication controller will create? One. That pod will have how many containers? That pod will have how many containers as per the specification? One. Let's say if I give like this, how many pods will be created and each pod will have how many containers? Each pod will have how many containers? Two pods. Each pod will have one container. If I want to create a multi-container pods, does it, can I have something like this? Again, another container. It is going to create a multiple pods with multiple containers. Can I do something like this? Multi-container pods, something like this if you have that requirement. Now, if I do like this, two pods, each pod will have how many containers? Concept is important, guys. Not what I am typing here, not what I am writing here is not important. The concept is important. Based on your requirement, based on your use case, can you leverage all these Kubernetes resources or objects to deploy and manage your applications? Here I am taking a sample application. Here I am taking a sample application. If you are by hearting, are you going to use same image, copy paste in your actual applications, actual servers? No. Instead of this image, are you going to use your actual image, your actual application Docker image? That is important. That can be in ECR, that can be in the Nexus, that can be in the JFrog. So I am creating a RC in this namespace. So these replicas using this pod template will be created in which namespace? You are creating a parent. The childs will be in the same parent only, right? You are creating a parent. Are you going to stay with your parent as a kids? You are the kids. Pods are like a kids. Pods are like a kids. Replication controller is like a parent. Is replication controller is taking care of the pods Like, is your parents are taking care of you under the same namespace. Under the same namespace. Okay. Now, let me create like this. I don't want to create pod. I want to create a RC. But I have not deleted a service, guys. I have not deleted a service. Still, I have a service. But is that service has any endpoints? If I see this service, do I have that service has any endpoint? Does that service has any endpoints as of now? No. Now, let me create a replication controller now. I don't want to create a pod. I want to create a replication controller. Now I don't want to create a pod. I want to create a replication controller. Let me delete from line number 1 to 13. Now I am creating a pods, but am I directly creating a pods here? No. Here, one more thing I can use is selectors. One more thing I can use is selector or selectors. These selectors is replication controller selectors. Can I use something like this? Your pod labels as a selector here. Is this replication controller is going to use these selectors to look after these pods and manage the pods? But for RC, this is not mandatory. For RC, these selectors are not mandatory. Even though you use selectors, that is fine. But RC, these selectors are not mandatory. Now, let me deploy. I have given number of replicas as 2. How many replicas will be created now? Before creating, let me show you. Do I have any replication controller as of now in that namespace? Now, in that namespace, I am creating one replication controller with 2 replicas. Is that replication controller will use this pod template and will it create a number of pods, the 2 pods? Now, if I apply kubectl apply -f that maven web app rc unknown field, something called unknown field called selectors. Let me use, I think it is selector. Now let me apply. Now, if you see in that namespace, that is in the default, not in a default namespace, that is in a test namespace, kubectl. Now, if you see, do I have one replication controller here? Do I have one replication controller here now with that name? What is this? A desired current ready, like that it is showing. What is this desired? Is it a containers or is it a pods? Here, whatever I see, desired current ready. Is it a number of containers or number of pods? Number of pods. Now, is this replication controller is expected to have a 2 pods? Do we have currently 2 pods? And is those pods also ready? Is it ready? Which means is it running now? Now, who is creating and who is looking after these pods now? Who is creating and who is looking after these pods? Is this controller is looking? Is this controller is looking? This replication controller is looking after the pods. Now, if something goes wrong with one of the pod, I am intentionally deleting the pod. I am intentionally deleting the pod. Now, if you observe, am I getting the pod automatically? Is it replicating again? Now you see, is that pod is recreated, replicated? Now, who is taking care of those pods? Who is managing the life cycle of that pod? RC. Now, if you see, service I have not deleted. If I see the endpoints, now can I see 2 endpoints for that service? kubectl get EP. Can I see 2 endpoints for that service? Which means, is that service is pointing to both the pods? Because that pod has a label. that pod has a label. That pod has a label like this. When I created a service, did I use those labels as a selectors? This service has that selector. So is that pointing to both the pods, this one and this one both? Now, does that service will act as a load balancer within the cluster, or when you are accessing from outside also using node port, is that service will act as a load balancer within the Kubernetes cluster? Is it going to distribute the traffic to those two pods? Now, service is for communication, but controller, that replication controller is for what purpose? Is that replication controller is creating and managing that pods. If pod goes down, that pod will be automatically created now. If required, can I scale the pods like this manually also? In my manifest, I can change, or imperatively also I can change. In manifest, can I say replicas as 1 or 2 or 3, 4 like that? I'm making it 1 now. If I am applying again, now instead of 2 replicas, what is the desired replicas now? What is the desired replicas now? 1. Now do I have only 1 pod instead of 2 pods? I can scale like this. Can I scale imperatively also like this? kubectl scale RC, your RC name, which replication controller you want to scale. Can I say something like this? Replicas as 2, 3 like this. This is imperatively. But if I do like this, in the file, will it be updated, or directly in the cluster it will update? Directly in the cluster it will update, not in the file. Now if I see, why I am getting this error, guys? Why I am getting this error? Why I am getting this error? Now, namespace. I have that in a different namespace. Now I have scaled like this. Now can I see 3 replicas now? Desired 3, current 3, ready 3, which means do I have a 3 pods now? Now, if that service, can I see that service will have a 3 endpoints now? That whatever service, that Maven web app service, if I see the endpoints, you can describe that service, or you can see the endpoints like this. Now, can I see those 3 pods as a endpoints to that service? Is everyone clear how replication controller works? So tomorrow I'll continue. Tomorrow I'll continue what is the replica set, how different it is from replication controller, what is daemon set, how it is different from other two, what is deployment, why it is recommended. I'll continue tomorrow, guys. Guys, each class is important. I'm trying to cover from very basics and what is happening in the background also. Make sure you are attending all the sessions and make sure you are practicing so that it will be easy for you. One concept is related to other. If you don't practice, if you don't attend regularly, you cannot understand subsequent classes. Suppose you guys have not attended namespace class, pods class. If you attended directly this deployment or replication classes, will you be able to understand what is namespace first, what is pod? No. So each class is related to other. Make sure you are attending all the sessions. Thank you, guys. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow with the replica set, the daemon sets, and deployments. Thank you.